Hello everyone. At the outset, I must welcome you all to this e-learning program by EduSat Orsac Odisha. Today, we will discuss something about pollination, why this pollination is important, what role exactly this pollination plays in the life cycle of a plant. Okay, let us see. In a plant, two types of generations are there. One is the sporophytic generation, which is a diploid one, and the other one is the gametophytic generation, which is a haploid one. What you see in an angiospermic plant, you see a flower, and that flower contains the reproductive parts, the male reproductive part stamen, which is collectively called androecium, and the female part pistil, which is collectively called gynoecium. Now, this stamen, that is the sporophytic part, the male sporophytic part, and this pistil is the female sporophytic part. Now, from the sporophyte to gametophyte, this change from the sporophyte, that is diploid, to gametophyte, that is haploid. Now, for this change from the sporophytic generation to gametophytic generation, or from sporophyte to gametophyte, meiosis or reduction division is required. And again, from gametophyte to sporophyte, the fusion of gametes, that is male gamete and female gamete, is required. So, in an angiospermic plant, there is a fusion, or what we call the fertilization in case of a plant. So, for that fusion, for that fertilization, basically angiospermic plant and also some of the gymnosperms, they need pollination. Why this pollination is important? Let us see a slide. Now, you see a term zoidogamy. The lower plants are the zoidogamous plants, the bryophytes, the pteridophytes, and part of gymnosperms also. These plants are zoidogamous plants. That means they have a male sex organ called antheridium and a female sex organ called archegonium. Inside this antheridium, the male gametes are produced. Those male gametes swim, that enter into the female sex organ, fuses with the female gamete, so that fertilization can take place. So, this is seen in case of zoidogamous plants, but that is not seen in case of higher plants or angiospermic plants, because higher plants, as you can see in the slide, these are siphonogamous plants. They produce something called pollen tube, and that pollen tube is produced from the pollen grain. So, they need pollination, that is a prerequisite for fertilization. If pollination will not take place, then fertilization will not take place. Then the next generation, the seed will not be produced, the fruit will not be produced. That is why pollination is very important. So, let us see what is pollination exactly. It exactly means the transfer of pollen grains, the pollen grains or the microspores which bears the male gamete. The pollen grain, the transfer of pollen grain from the anther part to the stigma part. Now, this is the male part, this is anther, inside which the pollen grains are produced. This is the female part, and this is the receptive organ stigma. So, the pollen grains are transferred from this anther to the stigma. That is what pollination is. And after pollination, fertilization takes place, because these plants or higher plants are siphonogamous plants. They produce certain tube-like structures in which the male gametes are transferred into the embryo sac, which is present inside the ovary, rather inside the ovule, so that fertilization can take place. Next generation, that means seed formation will take place, fruit formation will take place. So, for this fertilization process, for everything, the plant requires a pollination process, that is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Now, this is pollination, transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma. Let us see another slide. So, this is about the Japanese botanist. They have also said that ginkgo and cycas, these are gymnospermic plants. So, in those plants they have discovered this process called zoidogamy. So, let us see this slide, self pollination and cross pollination. Okay. So, we have two types of pollination, one is self pollination, the other one is cross pollination. So, the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of same flower or flowers, different flowers, but born on the same plant, that is called self pollination. And the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of another individual, that is called cross pollination. Let us see, suppose this is a plant, this is one first flower, this is another flower, and this is another plant with a flower. If the pollination takes place here in the same flower itself, then this pollination is called autogamy. If this pollination takes place between two different flowers, but born on the same plant, then this type of pollination is called zetonogamy. Auto means self, gamy means marriage, self marriage, autogamy. Zeton means never, and gamy means again marriage. So, it is a pollination between two different flowers, but born on the same plant. Now, if the pollination takes place or the pollen grains are released here from this anther that falls on the stigma of this flower, that means on another individual, then this is called cross pollination. So, the pollination between two different individuals is called cross pollination. So, here also we can find two types of cross pollinations. So, we have two types of pollination, one is self pollination, the other one is cross pollination. And in the self pollination we have seen one is autogamy, the pollination within the same flower, and another one called zetonogamy, the pollination between two different flowers but born on the same plant. Two different flowers but same plant. Now, cross pollination is again divided into two types. One is called xenogamy. Xenos means stranger. In Greek, genus means stranger and gamy itself is marriage. So, xenogamy, and the second one is called hybridism. Now, suppose here I have one plant and that belongs to species A, and here I have the same type of individual, and the pollination takes place between two individuals belonging to the same species, two different individuals but same species, then that is called xenogamy. But suppose I have one plant A here and another closely related plant, another allied species is here, suppose B, and the pollen grain falls on the stigma of the flower of B, pollination takes place and fertilization also takes place. Then that is another kind of cross pollination known as hybridism. Let us see some slides. So, these are some natural hybrids, that is because of hybridism. Hybrids between Jonepsiopsis sigmoida and Jonepsiopsis macrochila or macrochila. So, these are natural hybrids, that is because of this cross pollination hybridism. So also we can manipulate different species also by cross pollination by the breeding programs. The breeders, they also manipulate, they also mix two different type of species by cross pollination. And let us see Raphanus and Brassica, Raphanus sativus and Brassica campestris. So the pollen grain from Raphanus are said on the stigma of Brassica. Pollination takes place, fertilization takes place, and another variety arises from that, that is called Raphanobrassica. So also we can do alter these things also. I mean, from Brassica also we can take pollen grains, and that pollen grains we can shade on, I mean we can put that pollen grains on the stigma of Raphanus flowers, same also. So Raphanus and Brassica, these are the two parental plants taken for this breeding program, and the result is this Raphanobrassica. So ultimately we have two types of pollination, that is, one is self pollination, the other one is called cross pollination. Then in self pollination, one is autogamy, that is within the same flower, and geitonogamy, two different flowers but born on the same plant. Now some of the scientists, some of the authors, they consider geitonogamy as a type of cross pollination. Some of the authors, they have also considered this two, geitonogamy and genogamy, as another type of pollination called allogamy. Allos means different. So geitonogamy is genetically a type of self pollination, because two flowers born on the same plant are genetically similar, but ecologically some of the scientists, they consider geitonogamy as a type of cross pollination. So autogamy and geitonogamy, if we say genetically, then these two are the different types of self pollination, and in cross pollination we have xenogamy and hybridism. Xenogamy is the cross pollination between two similar individuals of same species, and hybridism between two different species, not different exactly, closely allied species, not different, closely allied species or probably same family. Interspecific cross pollination we can do, intergeneric, intrageneric cross pollination also we can do, but these are closely allied species. So this is about the types of pollination. Next we will move to the different contrivances of pollination. Dear student, so we will discuss now what are the different contrivances of self pollination and cross pollination. Now in nature, so many plants, they are adapted towards the self pollination, and so many other plants are adapted towards the cross pollination. The different adaptations of self pollinations are called the contrivances of self pollination, and the different adaptations of cross pollinations are called the contrivances of cross pollination. In other words, the contrivances of self pollinations are called the inbreeding devices, and the contrivances or the adaptations of cross pollinations are called the outbreeding devices. So we will focus on that. First, the contrivances of self pollination. So this is one of the contrivances of self pollination called cleistogamy. Now when a flower matures, anthesis takes place, and normally the flower opens like this, and when the flower opens, it exposes the male part and female part, and these flowers are called chasmogamous flowers. The flowers which open are called chasmogamous flowers after anthesis, of course, and the flowers which never open are called cleistogamous flowers. The petals are closed. So naturally the pollen grains cannot escape outside, and the other pollen grains also cannot invade into the flower. So in cleistogamous flowers, self pollination becomes obligatory. So you can see the screen. There are certain plants like Commelina bengalensis, Bhaula, Oxalis, Portulaca. These are all cleistogamous flowers. These plants bears cleistogamous flowers. the cleistogamous flowers are the flowers which never open. So, ultimately in these flowers cell pollination takes place. But some other plants are chasmocleistogamous plants. Of course, this Commelina bengalensis is also a chasmocleistogamous plant, because the underground flowers of Commelina which are underground are whitish off-white in color, and these are cleistogamous, but the above ground flowers of Commelina are purple in color, and these are chasmogamous flowers. So, the Commelina bengalensis is a chasmocleistogamous plant bearing both type of flowers, cleistogamous flower and chasmogamous flowers. But kleistogamy is a contrivance, is an adaptations for cell pollination. Homogamy. Homogamy means same time maturation of both the parts, both male part and female part. Naturally, when both the parts, both male part and a female part of a flower mature at the same time, the chance of cell pollination is more than the cross pollination. Of course, cell pollination is not obligatory, cross pollination also can take place, but the chance of cell pollination is more than the cross pollination. So, some of the homogamous flowers are Mirabilis jalapa. You have seen that plant, probably that is called 4 o'clock plant, pink flower, yellow color flower, white color flowers are there. So, that plant Mirabilis jalapa, in that plant homogamy is seen, and homogamy of course favors cell pollination than the cross pollination. So, also in case of Argemone mexicana. So, moving to the next slide, this is hermaphroditism. Now, Hermes and Aphrodite, these are the gods of Greek mythology. Hermes, as you know, is the goddess of beauty, and Aphrodite is the messenger or the god of wealth. Now, both are very beautiful, one is beautiful and the other one is very handsome. So, that is called hermaphroditism or hermaphrodite condition. Hermaphrodite conditions means bisexual condition. When suppose this is a flower and this is the male part and this one is the female part. When both the parts are present in the flower, naturally the chance of cell pollination is more. Suppose in a diclinous flower, in a staminate flower, only the male part is present, the female part is absent. So, naturally there is cross pollination, the chance of cross pollination is more in those plants, those flowers. Suppose same also in case of the pistillate flowers. In pistillate flower only the female part is present, not the male part. So, the chance, the cross pollination becomes obligatory there. If both the parts, male part and female part both are present in the flower, then naturally the chances of cell pollinations are more in case of hermaphrodite flowers or bisexual flowers. So, moving to the next slide. Now, some dichogamous flowers are also there, those are showing adaptations for self pollination. Now, dichogamy is one of the adaptation, one of the contrivance for cross pollination. Dichogamy means different time maturation of both the parts. The male part may mature fast, the female part may mature fast, that is called protandrous and protogynous condition, protandry and protogyny. But some of the dichogamous flowers, when they fail to do the cross pollination, they adapt certain safety mechanisms, safety measures, so that they can ensure pollination, and that is the cell pollination. Let us take the example of this sunflower, that is a plant of Asteraceae family, sunflower, Helianthus anus. In that flower, the anthers are present in syngenesious condition. Syngenesious condition means the anthers are fused, but the filaments are free. And imagine these fingers, my left hand fingers are the male part, that is anthers, and this part is the stigma, the female part. When this stigma fails to receive the pollen grains from other plants, usually this stigma receives the pollen grains from the other plants. But when the stigma fails to receive the pollen grains from the other plant, it calls down, it bends down, it collects the pollen grain from this its own anther. It brushes against the anther so that it can collect the pollen grains. So, that is what a fail safe mechanism. When the plants fail to do cross pollination, some of the plants, some of the flowers, they adapt some safety measures to ensure the self pollination, so that pollination can take place and that ensures seed production. So, that is what the safety mechanism or some adaptations for self pollination by the cross pollinated plants. Moving to the next slide, bud pollination. So, this is a type of self pollination when the flower is still in the bud condition, pollination takes place and the process of fertilization is also initiated. That is seen in case of rice, that is seen in case of pea also, your Pisum sativum. So, in these plants the pollination already takes place during the bud condition. So, that it is mandatory, not exactly mandatory, but it favors the self pollination. Moving to another slide. Now, these are the advantages of self pollination. What we have discussed are the contrivances of self pollination, how different plants are adapted towards the self pollination, how different plants they are modified to do self pollination. Now, in the slide we have different advantages of self pollination. The self pollination, as you can see, is a sure and economic method of pollination. It ensures seed production. In cross production, in cross pollination, the plant cannot ensure seed production, whereas in self pollination the plant ensures seed production. Now, the self pollination maintains the homozygosity condition, that maintains the pure line condition, and in self pollinated plants the plant need not produce a large number of pollen grains, which is seen in case of this cross pollinated plants. The cross pollinated plants, some of the cross pollinated plants, they produce not less than 5 lakh pollen grains, mere wastage of pollen grains. So, that wastage is not seen here in case of self pollinated plants. In self pollinated plants, the pollen wastage is less, the energy wastage is less, and the plant need not produce a large number of pollen grains. And as I said, it is one of the fail safe mechanism, because when the plants, so many plants are there which are normally doing this cross pollination, but when they fail to do so, they adapt this fail safe mechanism or safety adaptations to ensure the pollination or the seed production. And the cross pollinated plants, they have to produce a lot of more things like nectar, food material, they have to attract the insects, they have to modify the pollen grains in such a manner that so that cross pollination can take place. So, that is not seen in case of self pollinated plants. The self pollinated plants usually do not produce any such kind of nectar or edible product to attract the insects, because it itself ensures the seed production. And as I said, it maintains the pure line condition, it maintains the homozygosity condition. So, it maintains the parental line for indefinitely period of time. Of course, there are some drawbacks of self pollination. The race ceases after so many generations. There are certain drawbacks also. The advantages of cross pollinations are the disadvantages of self pollination. We are discussing about the advantages of self pollination. The self pollination also eliminates some of the bad characters, some of the bad recessive characters rather from the plant, as it maintains the homozygosity condition, it maintains the pure line. So, it eliminates some of the bad recessive characters from the plant. So, we have seen what is pollination, what is self pollination, and what is cross pollination. And in nature, there are certain plants those are modified for self pollination, and there are certain plants those are modified for cross pollination. The types of self pollinations like autogamy and geitonogamy, the type of cross pollinations like xenogamy and hybridism, and what are the advantages of self pollination. The advantages of self pollinations are the disadvantages for cross pollination, and the advantages of cross pollination are the disadvantages of self pollination. So, we will meet again and we will discuss the different contrivances of cross pollination, what are the different outbreeding devices to ensure the cross pollination, and also we will discuss the different advantages of cross pollination. In the last class, in the last lecture, we have discussed about what is pollination, what is the importance of pollination in case of angiospermic plant, what is self pollination, what is cross pollination, what are the inbreeding devices or what are the adaptations for self pollination. Today we will discuss something about the cross pollination, the outbreeding devices, the contrivances of cross pollination. You know, cross pollination is the pollination between two different individuals. One is xenogamy and the other one is hybridism. Xenogamy is the cross pollination between same species and hybridism is the cross pollination between two closely allied species. Now, these are the contrivances of cross pollination. Now, these are the contrivances of cross pollination. One is dicliny or unisexuality, the second one is dichogamy, self-sterility, horcogamy, heteromorphism and prepotency. This is something this just opposite of hermaphroditism, what we have already discussed in case of self-pollination, this bisexuality, bisexual condition. This is unisexual condition which is seen in case of some dioecious plants. Dichogamy is just the opposite of homogamy, what we have studied in case of this self-pollination. Okay, first we will discuss what is dicliny or unisexuality. Now, there are certain plants which are dioecious in nature. That means, a separate male plant and a separate female plant exist in nature. So, cross pollination is the rule among the diclinous plants. Plants bearing either staminate flowers or pistillate flowers. There is a separate plant, the male plant and another a female plant. Let us have a look. Now, this is a papaya plant with only male flower, papaya plant with only male flower. Now, this is another papaya plant with only female flower. Now, what kind of pollination is possible in case of this plant? Naturally, cross pollination, because a separate male plant and a separate female plant exist in nature. So, cross pollination is the rule of this diclinous plants, dioecious plants. Now, this is a pistillate flower, that means only female flower in case of grape. This is a staminate flower, you can mark the flower only wears the male sex organ, I mean the male part, that is androecium or stamen. Now, in these flowers, I mean in staminate flower, in pistillate flower, in dioecious plants, naturally the chances of cross pollination is more, rather in diclinous plants the chances of cross pollination is more, and in dioecious plants the only pollination which can take place is the cross pollination. Now, you can see this is a cucurbita plant, this pumpkin plant with both male and female flowers. Naturally, in this cucurbita plant, in this pumpkin plant, when a single plant bears both male and female flowers, naturally the chances of getonogamy is more, which we can say genetically is a type of self pollination, but ecologically is a type of cross pollination. So, this is something about dicliny or unisexuality. Next, moving to dichogamy. As I said, this is just the opposite of homogamy. Homogamy, what we have discussed in self pollination, the male part and female part both mature at the same time. But here in dichogamy, both the parts, the male part and female part, they mature at different time. When the male part matures first, we call that as protandry, protandrous condition. When the female part matures first, we call that as protogyny or protogynous condition. So, this is about dichogamy. When the male part matures first, the pollen grains of that anther pollinate some other plants, and the same in case of this protogynous condition. When the female part matures first, the stigma receives the pollen grains from the other plant. So, this is you can see in the picture, this is a protandrous condition where clerodendrum is the plant, and here the male part matures first. This is Another picture where we can see protogynous condition. First, the stigma becomes receptive, the female part matures first, that becomes receptive, and in the second day the anthers they become mature and dehiscence of anthers occurs. So, in both these conditions, I mean in protandrous condition and in protogynous condition, we have the chances of cross pollination, the chance of cross pollination becomes more. So, next moving to the third one, that is self sterility. So, this is a condition when the flower cannot be fertilized by the pollen of the same flower, or sometimes of the flower of the same strain, same variety of plants. This is called self sterile condition. This is seen in case of Nicotiana or tobacco. This is seen in case of potato plant, where the pollen grains become sterile when that falls on the stigma of the same flower, because they are incompatible to that stigma. Actually, what happens when the pollen grain falls on the stigma, there is an interaction between the pollen and pistil. Here, the lack of that interaction between the pollen and pistil makes that self sterile. About the pollen pistil interaction we will study later on, but this is a condition which ultimately leads to the self sterile condition or self sterility. In one of the orchid, it happens that when these pollen grains of the same plant falls on the stigma withers because of the decomposition, and pollination cannot take place, self pollination is inhibited and cross pollination takes place. So, this is self sterile condition, and that is we can divide that this self sterile condition or self incompatibility into gametophytic self incompatibility and sporophytic self incompatibility. So, this is self incompatibility. You can see when the pollen grains of a particular genotype S1 and S2 falls on the stigma, if the stigma have the same gene or same alleles of that gene S gene, that is because of gene which is present in the S locus, that is S gene alleles. So, here you can see when S3 and S4 falls on the stigma becomes receptive, pollination takes place and fertilization takes place. But when the same type of same genotypes are falling on the stigma, the pollen pistil interaction is not seen and self incompatibility is seen. So, this term self incompatibility was first coined by Stout in 1917. However, Kohlreuter first reported this in Verbascum species, and this is not seen in case of 1 or 2 plants. This is seen almost in 116 families of angiosperms, this self incompatibility like Fabaceae, Brassicaceae, Poaceae. There is a mistake in this slide, that is Poaceae, P-O-A-C-E-A-E, Fabaceae, Brassicaceae and Poaceae. And the self incompatibility can be of 2 types. One is heteromorphic type, one is homomorphic type. This homomorphic type is again categorized into GSI, that is gametophytic self incompatibility, and SSI, that is sporophytic self incompatibility. When the incompatibility is controlled by the genotype, diploid genotype, there is again a mistake in the slide, that is diploid genotype of sporophytic tissue from which pollen grains are derived, then that is called sporophytic incompatibility, sporophytic self incompatibility. When there is an incompatibility that is controlled by the genotype of male gametes or pollen grains, that is haploid condition, then this is called gametophytic cell incompatibility, which is seen in case of Solanaceae and Poaceae. So, this condition, the self incompatibility condition depends on several factors. This heteromorphism we will discuss later on. This genes involved, there are sometimes there is a single gene, that is monoallelic, sometimes there are 2 genes, that is diallelic, sometimes these factors are governed by many genes, that is polyallelic. And similarly, the cytology of the pollen grain also plays a role, because when the dehiscence of pollen grain takes place, some pollen grains are two cell, the generative cell and the tube cell, and in some pollen grain the generative cell divides to form two male gametes or two sperms. So, those are trinucleate. So, binucleate pollen grains and trinucleate pollen grains, again there are difference between the binucleate pollen grain and trinucleate pollen grain behavior. So, expression of sites, whether that site is ovary or that site is style which is present just below the stigma, or the stigma itself may be the site. So, there are certain factors of this genetic incompatibility because of which self sterility takes place. So, next moving to this horkogamy. Horkogamy means some structural barrier which is present in the flower which prevents cell pollination, naturally enhances the chances of cross pollination. Suppose there is a flower and the anther is just placed above the stigma. Naturally, the pollen grain falls on the stigma and cell pollination takes place. But if there are these anther and stigma, these are far away, naturally there is a chance of cross pollination. There is more chance of cross pollination than the cell pollination. That is what we call horkogamy, the structural barrier or the physical barrier because of which the cell pollination is inhibited, prevented, and the chance of cross pollination is more. In families like Brassicaceae and Caryophyllaceae, the stigma extends far beyond what I have just explained you. Suppose this is the anther and this is the style or stigma, and it extends far beyond the stamen, so that the anthers are more likely not to reach the stigma and cross pollination takes place. So, in case of Gloriosa, I will show you the picture. In case of Gloriosa, the extrudes anthers are there, the dehiscence of anther, of course, the pollen grains cannot reach the stigma. So, in Calotropis procera, in Cryotropis gigantea, in other orchids also, where the pollen grains are aggregated into some group like structures called pollinia or polliads. So, that is dependent on insects. So, there also the cell pollination gets prevented, and the chances of cross pollination, rather only chance of cross pollination is there. These are two flowers. One is Arenaria species of Caryophyllaceae. The second picture, the red one, is Gloriosa superba. So, you can see the anthers are exerted and you can mark the stigma. So, naturally here the pollen grains after dehiscence cannot reach the stigma and cross pollination takes place. So, this is horkogamy, and more about this insect pollination we will discuss in the entomophilous parts, in the entomophilous flowers. So, the next contrivance of cross pollination is heteromorphism. In some plants there are dimorphic conditions and trimorphic conditions of flower. That means two morphological condition or three morphological conditions. So, that is known as heteroanthy if anther are placed in different positions, or heterostyly if styles are present in different positions. So, in so many plants this dimorphic and trimorphic conditions are seen, because of which this heteromorphism condition is seen, and that is what we have already discussed in case of this self sterility condition or self incompatibility. So, you can see the slide. The first one is a distyle condition, where in one picture you will find long style and in another picture you will find short style. Naturally, in these flowers, in this kind of plants, the chance of cross pollination is more. So, stylar dimorphism also you can see this long morphological condition and short morphological condition. So, this is again showing the chances of cross pollination. So, heteroanthy condition also you can see the different length of anthers, I mean the filaments sometimes are very short and sometimes the filaments are long. So, naturally this is heteroanthy condition, and this also favors cross pollination. Another condition is enantiostyle. Sometimes the style is coiled towards the right side, sometimes the style is bending towards the left side. This again promotes the cross pollination rather than self pollination. So, this is a condition seen in case of primula flower. This was discovered by long back by Darwin, the pin-eyed and thrum-eyed. So, in a picture A you will find the pin-eyed flower, and in the picture B you will find the thrum-eyed flower. In one flower you can see the position of the anther that is present below, and in the thrum-eyed you can see the position of anther that is present at the throat of the corolla tube. So, naturally in these plants, in these type of flowers where heteromorphism is seen, that the chances of cross pollination is more than the self pollination. Then another type of contrivance of cross pollination is prepotency, though we can include that in this self incompatibility, but I have kept it in another as one of the though we can study this in self incompatibility, but I have kept this as one more contrivance of cross pollination, where pollen grains of another flower germinate more rapidly. Suppose this is a stigma, and pollen grains from same individual and pollen grains of other individual falls on the stigma, then the other one grows rapidly than its own pollen grain, thus enhancing the chance of cross pollination, which is seen in case of apple. So, in apple the self incompatibility is because of this prepotency. So, these are the contrivances of cross pollination. Now, what are the advantages of cross pollination? The advantages of cross pollination are the disadvantages of self pollination, and the disadvantages of self pollination are the advantages of cross pollination. What are the advantages of cross pollination? Let us see. So, the cross pollination is beneficial to the race of the plant, as it introduces new genes naturally to this lineage of the as a result of which fertilization between two genetically different gamete takes place. This cross pollination involves resistance to diseases in offsprings. So, the plants produced by cross pollinations are more resistant to genetical diseases rather than the self pollinated plants. The cross pollinated plants, they show more adaptation towards the environment rather than the self pollinated plants. Conditions like drought condition, conditions like frost condition, conditions like salinity condition, the cross pollinated plants are more adapted than the self pollinated plants. The seeds produced by cross pollinated plants are more vigorous and they have more viability than the self pollinated plants. The fruit quality, the seed quality are much better in case of cross pollinated plants than the self pollinated plants. The cross pollinated plants show more yielding, that is that is better for farmer, and obviously a farmer is cultivating for more yield. So, the cross pollinated plants show more yield, this heterosis or hybrid vigor, and better fruit quality, better seed quality, and more useful varieties are produced by this cross pollination rather than the self pollination. And if there is any recessive character, then that recessive character is eliminated as because of the genetic recombination seen in case of cross pollination. These are the advantages of cross pollination. But if you see the disadvantages of cross pollination, naturally the cross pollinated plants have to produce a large number of pollen grains to ensure the seed production. The cross pollinated plants cannot ensure seed production. The homozygosity condition is maintained in case of the self pollinated plants rather than the cross pollinated plants. So, these are the disadvantages of cross pollination. Yes, in cross pollination more wastage is seen in case of pollen grains, and more energy wastage is also seen in case of pollen grains. So, these are the advantages and disadvantages of cross pollination. So, what we have studied today, the contrivances of cross pollination like dichotomy or unisexuality, then dichogamy, which is just the opposite of homogamy, then self sterile condition or genetic incompatibility or self incompatibility, then hercogamy, the structural barriers which prevent self pollination and enhances the chance of cross pollination, then heteromorphism, the different morphological conditions like distyly, tristyly condition, heteroanthous condition, heteroanthy condition, which again enhances the chance of cross pollination, and prepotency, one of the condition of self incompatibility seen in case of apple, which enhances the chance of cross pollination. Another factor is that the self pollinated plants, they do not require any agent for pollination, but the cross pollinated plants, they require an agent for pollination, and here are some agents of pollination. There are some abiotic agents and there are some biotic agents. The abiotic agents of pollinations are air, and the pollination is called anemophily; water, the pollination is called hydrophily. Again, two types of hydrophilous plants are there. One is epihydrogamy or epihydrophily, and the second one is hypohydrogamy or hypohydrophily. When there are the pollination takes place by some biotic agents, some living organisms, that is biotic type of pollination by some biotic agents, and several terms are assigned to that, like animals zoophily, insects entomophily, and remember 70% of the crop plants are insect pollinated plants by insects, and that is called entomophily. Then in insects, bees, wasps, moth, flies, butterflies, these are the agents of pollination, and accordingly different names have been assigned to this kind of pollination, like melitophily, phalaenophily, sapromylophily, psychophily. And when birds are the pollinating agents, that is called ornithophily. When bats are the pollinating agents, that is called chiropterophily or chiropterophily. Then beetles, that is called cantharophily. Snails, that is called malacophily. Then ants, that is called myrmecophily. When the pollination takes place by rats, that is called rodentophily. When the pollination takes place by snakes, that is called ophiophily. And in certain literatures also, I have found that the elephants, while moving in the forest, they do pollination in the Rafflesia plant, though Rafflesia is usually pollinated by flies because it emits a foul smell. So, the flies are attracted towards the foul smell and pollination takes place. But in that literature, I found that when elephants, they move in the forest, they do pollination in certain plants like Rafflesia, which is the largest flower, and in some other plants also. Then the pollination by lizards, that is called herpetophily, the pollination by snakes, that is called ophiophily, and we human beings also do pollination knowingly and unknowingly. Knowingly, we do the breeding program. So, and unknowingly, when we deal with some plants like plucking flowers and all those things, unknowingly also we do pollination, and that is called anthropophily. So, in the next class, we will discuss all these agents of pollination. Thank you for watching this.